Hello everyone, Colin Cadet here for Woodworkweb. And today we're back again with another brief question and answer period with some tips and hints in it. And if some of you recall, a few months ago I built a sliding miter stand that stored my compressor underneath. And this is what it looks like. And it works great, it's very handy. The only real problem is if I want to move it around, it doesn't move very well. And one of our readers had a tip for me that I wanted to share with you. I used these casters, and when I measured them, they're only 2 1/4 inches. They're actually quite small. And one of our commenters, Frank Spillman, suggested that I use a 3-inch or even a 4-inch, that it'll roll much easier. And Frank is absolutely right. So I'm going to go and get some bigger casters and refit this stand with bigger casters. So thanks, Frank, for that tip. And still with the forums on Woodworkweb, Bill the Builder had what I thought was a great question, and we'll have to go to the blackboard to answer this one. He says, simple question, which is better, water-based stain or oil-based stain? And that's a great question, Bill. Let me show you what the differences are on the blackboard here. So Bill, the real answer to that is oil-based stains or water-based stains. There isn't really one that's better than the other. And here's what stains do. If you check out our video on dyes and stains, you'll know that dyes typically lay on top of the wood. If this is our wood down here, this black area, stains typically lay on top of it, whether it's oil-based or water-based. But the real key is knowing what you're going to put on top of the stain, if you're going to put something on top of it. For example, you might be wanting to put a water-based cover, a water-based varnish or something on top of your stain, and that will sit on top of the stain. So you have actually got a little bit of a layer happening. And what happens, some water-based varnishes will not adhere properly to an oil-based stain. So it really depends what you're putting on top of the stain. If you're putting a water-based varnish on top, you probably want to use a water-based stain. If you're using an oil-based varnish, then you would be fine to use, actually in that case you could use either a water-based or a oil-based stain. Either one of them would work fine. Now we have another question from SMK. He says, I do want to know, are you supposed to thin varnish? Well, the quick answer to that, SMK, is no. Most varnishes are manufactured to be used just the way they are right out of the can. And that's especially true if you're using an outdoor varnish, because a lot of them have something called a UV inhibitor built into them, and that's put in so that it helps protect the wood underneath the varnish, helps protect it from fading, and it also makes sure that the varnish stays on a little bit longer, so that it doesn't break down, so that you don't need to re-varnish as often. So thinning that is not a good idea. Now, a lot of woodworkers thin varnish, and they often thin it with tung oil. And the reason they do that, there's 2 reasons. First of all, they like the finish. Most of them like the finish that gives, and that's a personal preference. Some of them also thin it because they want the varnish to go longer or to stretch longer on their project. And particularly if you're near the end of a can of varnish, you might want to mix that with something so that you get a little bit more usage out of it, or so that it goes a little bit farther on your project. But you do have to be careful with any of those kinds of products when you get near the end of a can. And what I found a few years ago at I think it was at a flea market, was I found a whole great big box of these nylons, old nylons, and these make they're perfect for pouring paints and varnishes and those kinds of things through, so that you don't get the crud that is often associated with the very bottom of a can of varnish. Now you have to be careful with varnish in that you don't get bubbles in it. That's why you never want to shake varnish. You want to stir it slowly, and running it through something like this will give you or can give you bubbles. But if you're mixing it and making it thinner, those bubbles will start to tend to come out once it's thinner, so it negates that. So thinning varnish, definitely an option. And if you want to know what it looks like, the best thing to do is to try it and see what you think of it on your project. So that concludes our question and answer and tips and hints for this session. If you've got questions, post them on the forums on Woodworkweb, or send us a note on one of our YouTube videos, and we're trying to make sure we get back to everybody who has questions for us. But don't forget, if you like our channel, we ask you to subscribe to us, like us on Facebook, follow us on Twitter. I'm Colin Canet for Woodworkweb. Thanks for watching.